What's going on, guys? It's Sebastian here, and today I'm going to be going over the current NFL playoff picture. I'll go over the teams that have locked up their divisions, locked up a certain seed, teams that have clinched a playoff berth but can still win the division, teams that could win to get in, and teams that need a win and some help in order to get into the playoffs. We'll be going through all that and more, along with the potential playoff seedings and matchups and all that. So, without further ado, I'm going to share screen and it's about to get crazy. Okay, so starting off with the AFC, Ravens have the first seed locked up at 13-3 after destroying the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins sit at number 2 at 11-5. They have not locked up their division yet, as they have a date with the Bills next week, who beat them the first time around. The Chiefs, after defeating the Bengals, they win the AFC West for the eighth year in a row. They are locked in at the number 3 seed. Then you got the Jaguars sitting at 9-7 after shutting out the Panthers. A win over Tennessee gets them the number 4 seed, and they would host the Browns. Speaking of the Browns, Browns are locked in at number 5 at 11-5. They'll be the first wild card. Then you got the Bills sitting at 10-6. They can go as high as the number 2 seed if they beat Miami, but if they lose, they could be pushed out of the playoffs due to tiebreakers in terms of conference record. Then you got the Colts sitting at 9-7. They are the number 7 seed. A win over the Texans guarantees them a playoff spot. And if Jacksonville were to lose, then they'd be the number 4 seed and host Cleveland. And then the same thing goes for the Texans at the number 8 spot. A win over the Colts guarantees them a playoff berth and potentially the division if the Jaguars stumble against the Titans. Steelers, on the other hand, are on the outside looking in at 9-7 after a big win over the Seahawks. They need a win and they need a little bit of help in order to get in. So that's the AFC as of right now. For the NFC, Niners are the number 1 seed. They blocked that up after destroying the Commanders. The Cowboys leapfrogged the Lions and the Eagles as the number 2 seed at the moment after beating the Lions in a controversial ending and the Eagles choking against the Cardinals at home. The Lions are the number 3 seed after losing to the Cowboys. Then they got the Buccaneers sitting at 8-8 after they lost to the Saints. They had an opportunity to lock up the division, but they failed. Meanwhile, the Eagles fall back to the number 5 seed at 11-5 after a loss to the Cardinals and the Cowboys surviving against the Lions. Rams locked up a wild card spot at 9-7 after a nail biter over the Giants and the Seahawks losing to the Steelers at home. The Packers, they are the number 7 seed after they took care of business, and the Falcons and Seahawks, teams that they needed to lose, they both lost yesterday. The Seahawks are on the outside looking in after losing at home to the Steelers. So they are 8-8. So they need a win and they need Green Bay to lose or tie. As for the Saints, after a big win over the Buccaneers, they have an opportunity to steal the division from the Bucks if they beat the Falcons, along with the Bucks tying or losing to the Panthers or some other wacky scenarios. Then you got the Vikings at 7-9. They got destroyed by the Packers at home, and they need a win and they need a lot of help in order to sneak in as that last number 7 seed. And then you got the Falcons after getting destroyed by the Bears because the Buccaneers lost. They still have a chance to steal the South with a win over the Saints and the Bucks losing to the Panthers. And as you see, we got 5 teams that have locked up playoff spots. So there are still 5 spots remaining. So in the AFC, there are 5 teams fighting for 3 spots. The AFC South is on the line, along with the last 2 wildcard spots. And the AFC East is on the line as well. And then in the NFC, we got the NFC South at stake. Then we got the NFC East at stake here. And then the number 2 seed is also on the line. The Rams are going to be the 6th or 7th seed. The 7th seed is on the line as well. So now let's go over the potential scenarios. So the Ravens, Chiefs, and Browns are locked into the 1, 3, and 5 seeds. As for the number 2 seed, very simply, the winner of Bills versus Dolphins on Sunday Night Football gets the number 2 seed. But if the game ends in a tie, then the Dolphins would have the better record than the Chiefs and Bills, so they get the 2 seed. Meanwhile, the number 4 seed, if the Jaguars were to win, they get the 4th seed. But if they tie or lose, then the Texans Colts winner would get it, or some other crazy scenarios. Then you got the number 6 seed. The Bills could get the number 6 seed if some other wacky scenarios happen. If, let's say, they tie, or if they lose, plus a Texans Colts tie and a Steelers loss, the Bills would be the number 6 seed. But that's probably not going to happen. Meanwhile, the number 7 seed, it could be the winner of Texans versus Colts if the Jaguars beat the Titans, or the Steelers could get the number 7 seed if the Bills lose, or it could be the Bills if they lose and then the Steelers also lose. That would give the Bills the number 7 seed along with the Jaguars winning. Bunch of crazy scenarios. And then the Jaguars can still get in at the number 7 seed if the Steelers and Broncos lose. So, and in the NFC, the Niners have the first seed on lock, and then the 2 and 3 seeds is between the Cowboys, Eagles, and Lions. Those 3 teams are fighting for 2 spots. And then for the NFC South and the 4 seed, it's between the Bucks, and then if they lose, then it's between the Falcons and the Saints at that point. But if they tie, the Saints could steal the division. Meanwhile, the 5th seed is going to be either the Eagles or the Cowboys, so whoever doesn't win the division will be the number 5 seed and go on the road to play the NFC South winner. The number 6 seed is between the Rams or the Packers. Rams already clinched the playoff berth. Then for the number 7 seed, the Packers could get the 7 seed by beating the Bears and they get in. And then the Rams winning as well. But the Rams could also fall back to the 7th seed if they lose and the Packers win. But the Seahawks could get in with a win plus a Packers loss or tie. The Saints would have to get in with a win plus a Seahawks loss or tie. Same thing with the Packers. And then the Vikings, they would need a win plus the Saints, Seahawks, and Packers all losing. So, as you see here, those are the seeds that are locked. The divisions that are won, Ravens win the AFC North, Chiefs win the AFC West, and then the Lions win the NFC North, and the 49ers won the NFC West. So it's just those South and East divisions that are still up for grabs. The teams that are going to be wild cards for certain are the Browns and the Rams. Meanwhile, other teams that are confirmed to be in the playoffs, but could be a wild card or division winner, the Dolphins, the Cowboys, and the Eagles. The teams that need a win to get in, the Jaguars, the Bills, the Colts, and the Texans. The Colts and Texans play in Indy on Saturday. Then in the NFC, the Buccaneers and the Packers are placing win to get in scenarios. Meanwhile, teams that need a win and then some help or some other crazy scenarios. The Steelers, Seahawks, Saints, Falcons, Vikings. Now, the Steelers have scenarios where they could not win and they can still get in, along with the Seahawks and the Saints, but they need some other teams to lose. But the Falcons and Vikings, on the other hand, don't have that luxury, as those 2 teams need a win and some help to get in for certain. Now, what's interesting is the Steelers, there's a crazy scenario where the Steelers could win and still miss the playoffs, but they can also lose and make the playoffs. I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. Now, for the Miami Dolphins, it's very simple. A win or tie against the Buffalo Bills would grant them the number 2 seed in the AFC. Very straightforward. But if they lose, then they'd fall to the number 6 seed and play the Kansas City Chiefs on Wild Card Weekend at Arrowhead, while the Bills would get the number 2 seed and host the 7 seed, whoever that could be. As for the Jacksonville Jaguars, with a win, they would win the AFC South and host the Cleveland Browns on Wild Card Weekend. However, if they tie, then this is what could happen. So if the Jaguars were to tie and go 9-7-1, if they still want the AFC South at that point, Texans Colts would also have to tie. But if that doesn't work out in their favor, then they would need the Steelers to lose or tie against the Ravens to clinch a playoff berth. However, if the Jaguars lose, then they would need the Steelers to lose. So if the Jaguars lose, then they would also need the Steelers to lose and the Broncos to lose if they want to get the number 7 seed. So for Jacksonville, in case they lose against the Titans, then the Steelers would have to lose to the Ravens and the Broncos have to lose to the Raiders. So in case the Jaguars mess up, they'd have to root for the Ravens and the Raiders to get the job done. As for the Buffalo Bills, it's very simple. Beat the Dolphins and you win the AFC East and get the number 2 seed. If they tie, they get the number 6 seed. But if they lose to the Miami Dolphins, for them to still get in, either a Colts Texans tie would ensure them a playoff berth, or the Jaguars losing, or the Steelers losing. So if they lose, the Texans Colts game would have to tie in order for them to get in case the Steelers and Jaguars win. But if that doesn't happen, then they would be out of the playoffs unless either the Steelers or the Jaguars lose. As for the Colts, if they want to steal the division from the Jaguars, the simplest path is a win over the Texans and a Jaguars loss or tie. But in case the Colts tie against the Texans, then a Jacksonville loss would help the Colts win the South and play Cleveland on Wild Card Weekend. Meanwhile, if they want a wild card spot, then a win over the Texans, along with a Jaguars win over the Titans, would give the Colts a wild card spot. And it would either be the number 6 seed or the number 7 seed, depending on the results of Bills Dolphins. Actually, they don't need the Steelers to tie or lose because they have the advantage. Let me see. If the Colts were to tie, then that means the Steelers, yeah, the Steelers would have to lose. The Jaguars would have to lose. Where the Jaguars win? Okay, they get in as a 7 seed. Okay. Okay, so let me go back real quick. Okay, so they could still get in as a wild card if they tie plus the Steelers loss plus Jaguars win or tie. Yep, because they have the advantage over the Texans. Yep, so let me go back. However, if the Colts lose to the Texans, their season is over. Even if Jacksonville were to lose, along with Pittsburgh, then the Colts will be out if they lose to the Texans. So the Colts cannot afford to lose this game. They can afford to tie if the Steelers lose. Then they'd be in the playoffs. As for the Houston Texans, if they want to win the division, a win plus a Jaguars loss or tie would do it. A tie would not be good enough because they'd still be trailing the Colts. So for them, they have to beat the Colts, and the Jaguars would have to tie or lose to the Titans. But if they want a wild card spot, a win plus a Jaguars win would be enough to get a wild card spot. I realize that Steelers, let's see, yeah. So a win plus a Jaguars win, or if they tie the Steelers and Jaguars. Oh, wait, yeah. So if the Texans were to tie against the Colts, if they want a wild card spot, the Steelers would have to lose or tie against the Ravens, and the Jaguars would have to lose against the Titans. However, if the Texans lose to the Colts, their season is over, even if the Steelers and the Jaguars both lose, because they would have a worse division record than the Jaguars. So that's the Texans situation. As for the Steelers, let me see. Wait, as for the Steelers, is there a scenario where the Steelers can get in at 9-7-1? Let me see. The Steelers finished 9-7-1. They tie against the Ravens. Let's see. If they tie against the Ravens, let's say the Jags lose to the Titans, and then we have a loser in the Texans Colts game. Okay, so if that's the case, so if they tie against the Ravens, it'd be a Texans Colts win. One of those two teams would win, along with the Jaguars losing. Because if the Jaguars were to tie, then Jacksonville would get in over Pittsburgh because the Jaguars beat them. So, so for the Steelers, if they tie against the Ravens, then for them to get in at 9-7-1, they would need a winner in the Colts versus Texans game. It doesn't matter because that team would win the division if the Jaguars lose to the Titans. But if the Steelers lose, they're not out of it because if the Broncos win and the Jaguars lose and there's a winner in Texans versus Colts, the Steelers would get in as the number 6 seed. I mean, it's the number 7 seed at 9-8. And I would assume this is the case because of strength of schedule and strength of victory. They would have those tiebreakers over the Jaguars, who would be 9-8, along with the Texans and the Broncos. And to me, this is a little bit strange because the Steelers lost to the Texans. They lost to the Jaguars already. But because the Broncos would make it a four-way tie, that means that the head-to-head tiebreakers won't apply anymore because the Steelers, Broncos, Texans, and Jaguars didn't all play each other this season. So if it's a four-way tie, then the head-to-head tiebreakers would not be a factor anymore. And that's why the Steelers would get the edge due to strength of schedule, strength of victory, and having the tied best conference record with the Jaguars and the Texans, two teams that they lost to, which is kind of crazy. So again, if the Steelers lose, then they would need the Broncos to win, along with the Jaguars to lose, and then a loser in the Texans Colts game in order to create a four-way tie for the number 7 seed. But the crazy thing is, as I mentioned earlier, there's a scenario where the Steelers sweep the Ravens and still miss the playoffs. For that to happen, then there'd need to be a winner in the Texans versus Colts game, and the Bills would have to not lose against the Dolphins. So, yes, there is a scenario where the Steelers could beat the Ravens and still miss the playoffs, assuming that there's a winner in Texans versus Colts, along with the Jaguars beating the Titans and the Bills beating the Dolphins. But there's also a scenario where they lose and they still get in if the Broncos win, the Jaguars lose, and there's a winner in Texans versus Colts. So that's kind of crazy. A scenario where you could win and still miss the playoffs, but then on the other hand, you could lose or tie and still get in. That's where the Steelers are at. It's kind of weird. But now on to the NFC teams. For the Cowboys, they're in the playoffs, but if they want to win the NFC East, a win is the simplest way to do it. They just beat the Commanders, and it's all she wrote. They get the number 2 seed. But if they tie, then the Eagles would need to tie or lose to the Giants to still get the NFC East. But in case the Cowboys lose to the Commanders, they can still win the East if the Eagles lose to the Giants. As for the number 2 seed, a win is the simplest way for the Cowboys to get that. But in case they tie, they would need Detroit and Philly to either tie or lose in order for the Cowboys to secure the number 2 seed. So again, if the Cowboys were to tie against the Commanders, the Lions tying against the Vikings, along with the Eagles tying against the Giants, the Cowboys would still have the number 2 seed in the NFC. But if the Cowboys lose, they can still get the 2 seed if the Eagles and Lions also lose. As for the Detroit Lions, if they want the number 2 seed, a win over Minnesota, along with losses by both the Eagles and the Cowboys, or ties, will get them a 2 seed. But if they tie, then the Eagles and the Cowboys would both have to lose in order for the Lions to get the number 2 seed in the NFC. If Detroit loses, they're locked in at number 3, and they either play the Rams or the Packers on wild card weekend. As for the Buccaneers, if they want to win the division, the simplest path is by beating the Carolina Panthers, and they get the number 4 seed and host the Eagles or the Cowboys in the wild card round. But if they tie, then they would need New Orleans to either tie or lose against the Falcons. So let me go back. Let me go back and fix that. So let me go to the Buccaneers. All right, let's go back to slideshow. However, as you see here, if the Buccaneers lose to the Panthers, their season is over. Because if the Falcons beat the Saints, then it's a three-way tie in the NFC South. Oh, but what if the Packers lose? And then what if the Seahawks lose as well? Oh, but what if, I don't know, what if the Vikings beat the Lions or lose the Lions? It doesn't matter. Even if the Packers and the Seahawks both lose, or let's say the Saints were to beat the Falcons and win the division, there's no scenario in which the Buccaneers can lose and make the playoffs. Let me see, is there a scenario where they can get a wild card? Yes. Yes, there is. Okay, so the Buccaneers apparently can get in as a wild card. So the Bucks can get the 7 seed if they tie plus a Saints win to steal the division plus a Packers. Let me see. A Packers loss or tie. And I'm assuming the same thing for Seattle. Oh no, never mind. Okay, so Seattle would have to lose to Arizona. I mean, the Cardinals played pretty good spoilers yesterday. Just ask the Eagles. Okay, so Tampa Bay would be the number 7 seed if they tie and the Saints win, along with the Packers losing or tying, along with the Seahawks loss. Okay, so the Bucks can get in as a wild card, but they'd rather win the division and ensure a playoff spot and not hope for a bunch of other things going their way. Okay, back to the slideshow. As for the Eagles, if they want to win the East, a win plus a Cowboys loss or tie would get them the NFC East, and it would get them the number 2 seed if the Eagles win. But let's say the Eagles tie. If the Eagles tie, they would need the Cowboys to lose to the Commanders to win the NFC East. Meanwhile, if they want the number 2 seed, a win and a Cowboys loss is the simplest path for them to get that. But if the Eagles tie against the Giants, then a Cowboys loss and a Lions loss or tie, that would give the Eagles the number 2 seed in the NFC. All right. All right. We're almost done. As for the Green Bay Packers, for the Green Bay Packers, a win and they're in the playoffs. A win plus a Rams loss means they get the number 6 seed in the NFC and play Detroit, Dallas, or Philly on Wild Card weekend. However, if the Packers tie against the Bears, this is what we need to go their way. The Seahawks losing or tying against the a the Seahawks losing or tying against the Cardinals, and then the Saints or the Buccaneers losing or tying their game. So let's say the Saints win, the Bucks would have to lose. Oh no, the Buccaneers would just have to lose straight up. Okay, so all right. Yep, so Saints. So the Saints lost or tie because the Packers beat them, or the Buccaneers are straight up losing, and then Seattle losing as well. But if the Packers stumble against the Bears, they would need the Vikings to lose or tie, I believe, because the Vikings are 7-9 after they beat them last night. So a Vikings loss or tie. And all these crazy scenarios got me adjusting. Anyway, so if the Packers lose, so if the Packers lose, they would need the Vikings to lose or tie. They would need the Seahawks to lose. And then they would need, I believe they would need the Saints to lose. Or no, the Saints would have to lose straight up. Yeah, if they lose, yeah, if the Packers lose to the Bears, Saints have to lose. The Saints, the Saints would have to lose straight up. And then what about the Buccaneers if they lost to the Panthers? Okay, so one of the two. All right. So if the Packers lose, they would need Minnesota to lose or tie. They would need the Saints or Buccaneers to lose, and they'd need the Seahawks to lose. But we're not done. For the Seahawks to get in, if they beat the Cardinals, they need Green Bay to lose or tie against the Bears. But if they tie against the Cardinals, then the Packers would have to lose against the Bears, and then either the Saints or Bucks would have to tie or lose in order for the Seahawks to get in as the number 7 seed. So for the Seahawks, if they tie against the Cardinals, a Saints or Buccaneers loss or tie would get them in as the number 7 seed. Next for the New Orleans Saints, if they want to get in as the NFC South champ along with the 4 seed, a win and a Buccaneers loss or tie would get them in at 9 and 8. But in case the Saints tie, they would need the Buccaneers to lose against the Carolina Panthers. For a wild card spot, the simplest path is Bucks win to handle their division, along with the Saints winning and the Packers and Seahawks both either tying or losing in order for the Saints to get in. So if the Saints don't win the division, the let's say they beat the Falcons, but the Bucks beat the Panthers and win the division. If those two things go like that, then they would need the Packers and Seahawks to either lose or tie. But let's say that they were to tie and the Bucks win or tie against the Panthers. At that point, a Packers and Seahawks loss would still get them in the number 7 seed. But we got a couple more teams to go. We got the Minnesota Vikings. For the Vikings, they need a win along with the Packers, the Saints, and the Seahawks losing. So a win over Detroit, a Falcons win over the Saints, and the Cardinals beating the Seahawks, and the Bears beating the Packers. At that point, the Vikings would be the number 7 seed, no matter the result of the Buccaneers versus Panthers game. So, if the Vikings were to get in as the number 7 seed, that means Detroit would be locked in as the number 3 seed, the Rams would be the number 6 seed, and they would be at Detroit. And then the Eagles or Cowboys would play at Atlanta, and then the Atlanta or Tampa Bay, and then the Vikings would either go on the road to play the Cowboys or the Eagles if the Vikings were to get in. But there's one more team that still has a chance, and that's the Falcons. For the Falcons, they are out of wild card contention since they're losing a lot of key tiebreakers in terms of the head-to-head and conference record and all that. So for the Falcons, the only way they get in is if they beat the Saints and the Bucks lose to the Panthers, and they would get the number 4 seed and host the Eagles or Cowboys on wild card weekend. And if the Falcons were to get in, then it would be them going up against the Cowboys or the Eagles. Then that means the 7 seed would still be on lock. Not on lock. No, the 7 seed would still be decided between the Packers, the Rams, and the Seahawks. Because at that point, or actually the Vikings can still get in as well. Okay. So now let's go back to the potential seeds because we're not done yet. So the Bills versus Dolphins winner. Okay. If the Dolphins win or tie against the Bills, the Dolphins would be the number 2 seed in the AFC. It'd be Ravens, Dolphins, and Chiefs. And then the AFC South winner gets the fourth seed, and they would play the Cleveland Browns. And then the Bills. All right, so if the Dolphins win, they'd be the number 2 seed at 12 and 5. They would be hosting the number 7 seed. Then you'd have Cleveland locked in at number 5. So Dolphins beat the Bills. The first, second, third, and fifth seeds would be locked up. And to be real, all the seeds would be locked up if the Dolphins win, because that's a Sunday night game. But in this scenario, boom, they'd be number 2. So that means the fourth seed, the sixth seed, and the seventh seed are still up for grabs. So let's say that there's a winner in the Colts versus Texans game. That team could potentially win the division. But if the Jaguars were to win, then that would push the Bills back to 7th. And if the Steelers were to beat the Ravens, that would push the Bills out of the playoffs. So for the Bills, they can be eliminated if they lose to Miami, along with the Jaguars and the Colts or Texans winning and the Steelers winning. And that would push the Bills out of the playoffs. So, so that means the fourth seed is going to be either the Texans, Colts winner, or the Jaguars if they beat the Titans or they tie and then a tie in the Texans Colts game. Meanwhile, the Steelers, they can get the sixth seed with a win plus a Bills and Jaguars loss or a tie between the Texans and the Colts. All right. So if Jacksonville were to win the AFC South, let's say they beat the Titans, all right, they win the AFC South, they're playing Cleveland, right? Then the Chiefs would host Miami if the Dolphins lose. All right. So let's say the Bills were to beat the Dolphins. Then the playoff picture becomes a lot simpler. They would host the number 7 seed. Miami will go on the road to play Kansas City, and Cleveland will be going on the road to play the winner of the AFC South. Either the Jaguars if they beat the Titans, or they tie, and the Colts and Texans also tie. But if the Jaguars lose and there's a tie between the Texans and Colts, then the Colts will play Cleveland. But if there's a winner in the Colts, I mean the Texans against the Colts game, and then the Jaguars losing or tying against the Titans, then that means the Colts would host Cleveland, or the Texans would host Cleveland. So, if the Dolphins lose to the Bills, they would lose the 2 seed and the AFC East, and they would have to play the Chiefs on the road. Then the Bills will host the number 7 seed, and that could potentially be the Steelers. It could potentially be the Jaguars, or it could be the winner of the Colts versus Texans game. So a lot can happen. So if the Bills grab the number 2 seed, they could play the Texans Colts winner, they could play the Steelers, or they can play the Jaguars. But if the Dolphins win and they get the 2 seed, they could play the Bills again, or they could play the Steelers. Okay, so if the Dolphins beat the Bills, all right, so if the Dolphins beat the Bills, then they would play the Bills again, or they would play the Steelers. Okay, so if the Dolphins beat the Bills, they either get a rematch with the Bills or they play the Steelers. So if Miami wins, they play the Steelers or the Bills. And that's it. Just one of those two teams. Yep. Yep. It's either the Steelers or the Bills if Miami wins. But if they tie, then they could play the Texans Colts winner. Or if that's a tie as well, then they could play the Steelers. So if the Dolphins were to tie against the Bills, they would either host the Steelers or actually, could they play Jackson? Is there a chance they could play the Jaguars? Let me see. Oh, they could play Jacksonville as well. So they can play Jacksonville if the Jaguars lose, if the Steelers lose, and the Broncos lose, and then there's a winner. Or actually, it doesn't matter. Actually, no, it does. Yep. Wow. That is quite something. But if the Bills win and get the number 2 seed, they would force the Dolphins to play the Chiefs on wild card weekend. And then the Browns would take on the winner of the AFC South. It could be Jacksonville, it could be the Colts or the Texans. And if it's not the Jaguars, then the Jaguars could be the number 7 seed and play Buffalo, or it could be the Steelers. Yep. Okay, so Bills beat the Dolphins. They could play the Steelers. They can play the Jaguars. Or they can play the Texans or the Colts. Yep. So the Bills, if they get the 2 seed, they can play the Texans Colts winner. They can play the Steelers or the Jaguars as the number 7 seed. As for the 4th seed, it's very simple. Whoever gets the 4th seed wins the AFC South will be playing the Browns. Very simple. As for the number 6 seed, if the Dolphins lose to the Bills, they get the 6th seed and play Kansas City. But if that doesn't happen, then the Steelers, or actually, no, if they tie, then the Bills will get the 6th seed automatically. But if the Dolphins win, then it'll probably be the winner of Colts, the Texans Colts, assuming Jacksonville wins the division. But if that doesn't happen, if the Jaguars lose, then the Steelers will get the 6th seed. Man. And then the Bills will drop to the 7th seed and play Miami. Man, there's a lot of crazy scenarios. Seems like a lot of scenarios in the AFC for Week 18 depend on the results of Bills against the Dolphins. All right. Now, for the NFC. For the NFC, it's a little bit more straightforward. In the NFC, let's say the Cowboys beat the Commanders. Cowboys beat the Commanders, that means that the Niners would be locked into number 1 as they already are. Cowboys would get the 2, Lions would get the 3 seed, and the Eagles would get the 5 seed. The Eagles would then go on the road to play either the Buccaneers or the Saints or the Falcons. So whoever wins the NFC South, the Eagles would play against them, assuming Dallas wins. And then the Lions would either go up against the Rams or the Packers on wild card weekend. But if the Cowboys tie, they can still get the 2 seed with the Eagles tying or losing against the Giants, and then the Lions tying or losing against the Vikings. And at that point, pretty much the same scenarios as if they were to win. If the Cowboys lose to the Commanders, they would need the Eagles to lose to the Giants and the Vikings to beat the Lions in order for them to hold on to the number 2 seed. Then Detroit would be 3 and Philly would be 5. So the Cowboys, Lions, and Eagles are shuffling 2, 3, and 5. The Lions could get the 2 seed with a win, plus losses or ties by the Cowboys and the Eagles. But if they tie, then they would need the Eagles and Cowboys to lose in order to get the 2 seed. And if the Lions get the number 2 seed, here's what they could see. So if they tie and they get the 2 seed with the Cowboys and the Eagles both losing, here's who they can see in the wild card round potentially. They could see the Packers on wild card weekend. Or if the Rams lose, they could potentially see the Rams as the 7 versus 2. But let's assume that the Packers lose, they could potentially see the Seahawks. Let's say the Seahawks lose. Then there's a chance they can play. There's a chance they could play the Buccaneers actually. Or they could potentially see New Orleans. So as you see, if the Lions tie along with the Cowboys losing and the Eagles losing, they could see the Packers, the Rams, the Seahawks, or the Saints. One of those 4 teams Detroit will play if they get the number 2 seed. Now let's go back to the Cowboys for a second. Let's say they beat the Commanders and get the 2 seed, right? Here's who they could see on Wild Card Weekend. They could see the Packers if the Rams win or tie against the Niners, along with the Packers beating the Bears. Or some other crazy scenarios like, oh, the Packers tie and the Seahawks, I don't know, they tie or lose. The Buccaneers tie and the Saints tie or lose. Then the Packers would play Dallas. But some other teams that could get in there to play Dallas would be the Seahawks. Seahawks could get the 7 seed and play Dallas, or it could potentially be the Saints. If the Bucks win and the Seahawks lose and the Packers lose or tie, it could be Saints versus Cowboys, or the Vikings could potentially sneak in and they would play Dallas. So if the Cowboys get the number 2 seed, they could play the Packers, the Rams, the Seahawks, the Saints, or the Vikings. But if the Lions get the number 2 seed, then they could play the Packers because they would eliminate Minnesota. So if the Lions win or tie and get the 2 seed, they could play the Packers, they could play Seattle, they could play the Rams, or they could potentially play the Saints. Or actually, no, they can't because they lost to the Rams. Or actually, no, that's not true. They could still. Ooh. Okay, they could still play the Saints. Wow. And then I'm assuming Philly. All right. So if it's the Eagles, Lions, or Cowboys, that's the number 2 seed at 12 and 5. The Eagles and the Cowboys could potentially see the Packers. Yeah, they could potentially see the Packers. They could see the Rams. They could see Seahawks. They could see the Saints potentially. Or they could even see Minnesota, I think. Yeah, they can see Minnesota. So I think the Eagles and the Cowboys, they can play the Packers, Rams, Seahawks, Saints, or Vikings if either of those teams get the 2 seed. But if Detroit gets the 2 seed at 12-5 or 11-5-1, with the Eagles and Cowboys losing, then the Vikings are out and Detroit would either play the Packers, Rams, Seahawks, or the Saints. As for the number 3 seed, whether it's the Lions, assuming Dallas wins or Philly wins and Dallas loses. The 3 seed Detroit Lions would either play against the Rams or the Packers. But if the 3 seed happens to be Dallas, then it's either the Packers or the Rams in that 6 versus 3 matchup. Or if it's the Eagles, same thing. They get the Packers or the Rams. So whether it's the Lions, Eagles, or Cowboys, the 3 seed plays Green Bay or the LA Rams. As for the number 4 seed, it's very simple. The 4 seed goes to the winner of the NFC South. And the winner of the NFC South would play Dallas or Philly. One of the two. And then the 5th seed between the Eagles or Cowboys, that team would play the NFC South champ, whether it's the Bucks or the winner of Falcons versus Saints. The 6th seed is going to be either the Rams or the Packers, and that team would play Dallas, Detroit, or Philly. And then the 7th seed could be the Packers, Rams, Seahawks, Saints, or Vikings. And that team. All right, so let's see. So if the Packers get in as the number 7 seed, yep. So if the Packers get in as the number 7 seed, they could see Philly, they could see Detroit, or they can see Dallas. If the Rams fall back into the 7th seed, they see Dallas, they see Detroit, or they'd see Philly. If the Seahawks get in as the number 7 seed, that means the Packers are out, and the Seahawks would play Philly, Detroit, or Dallas. If the Saints end up getting the 7, they got Dallas, Philly, or Detroit. As for the Vikings, if they get the number 7 seed, if the Vikings get the number 7, let's see. Yep, so if the Vikings get the number 7 seed, it's between Dallas and Philly. So if the Vikings get in the playoffs as the number 7 seed, they have to go to Philly or Dallas. So that's it in terms of all the scenarios, or damn near all of them. There's also some other scenarios with ties and stuff, but as you can see, a lot of things can happen. So there's still so much to be decided with 1 week left in the regular season, even though most of the playoff spots are locked up by now and some of the seeds are locked up, there's still a lot to be decided. So in conclusion, in the AFC East and the number 2 seed is on the line between Buffalo and Miami. Meanwhile, the AFC South and the number 4 seed is decided between the Jaguars, Colts, and Texans. Meanwhile, the number 6 seed could go to the Bills if they tie, or some other crazy scenarios, or if the Dolphins if they lose to the Bills, or it could be the Texans Colts winner or the Steelers. And then the number 7 seed can go to the winner of Texans versus Colts, or it can go to the Steelers or the Bills or the Jaguars. So the fourth seed, sixth seed, and seventh seed, those are all on the line, along with the number two seed between Buffalo and Miami. In the NFC, the two seed is being decided between the Cowboys, Lions, and Eagles. And then so are the three seed and the five seeds. So the Cowboys, Lions, and Eagles are all fighting for the number two seed. And then the Cowboys and the Eagles, they can get the two, three, or five. Meanwhile, Detroit gets the two or the three seed. And then the number six seed, that's between the Rams and the Packers. Rams have already clinched the playoff berth with a win against the Giants and the Seahawks losing to the Steelers. And since the Rams swept the Seahawks already and have a better division record, that gives the Rams the advantage. Meanwhile, the number four seed, the NFC South, that is between, and I forgot. I forgot. Forgot to mention that the Bucks can get the number seven seed. There's a scenario in which they can get it, and I can show that off real quick. They tie along with the Saints winning, the Packers tying or losing, the Seahawks would have to lose to yep, they'd have to lose to the Cardinals, and the Bucks will get the seventh seed. So the seventh seed could go to Tampa Bay. So there's a couple scenarios here where the Saints and Bucks can both get in. But if the Bucks were to get in as the number seven seed, they play Dallas, Detroit, or Philly. So a lot's to be decided. So in the NFC East is being decided. The two seed is being decided as well. And then the three seed and the five seed will go to one of those three teams. The five seed goes to Dallas or Philly, whoever doesn't win the NFC East. The Rams get the sixth or the seventh seed. The Packers can get the sixth seed or the seventh seed or miss the playoffs entirely. And then the Saints or Bucks can potentially get in as a wild card if one of them doesn't win the division. And then the Seahawks could get in with a win and then some help from the Bears. The Saints can get in with a win and some help from either the Panthers or the Cardinals and the Bears. And then the Vikings, they would need a win plus a loss by the Packers, Seahawks, and Saints to get in at 8 and 9. And for the Buccaneers, if they were to tie against the Panthers, they can still get in as a wild card as long as the Packers lose, along with the Seahawks tying, or actually, no, the Seahawks would have to lose as well. Wow. So, yep, that is going to do it for the NFL playoff picture. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this long Zoom session. I'm going to take off, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.